Ethics and morality, the wheels that drive civilized societies. They are the lawmakers that prevent humanity to interact with each other as wild beasts loosed upon this world, as Albert Camus, a French philosopher, once said. In a society that praises and idealizes a hero, not only in literature and cinematography, but as a complete embodiment of society's ethical ideals, the prominence of ethical egoism, a radical theory that morality is a means with intent to maximize perceived self-interest, has many real-world implications. Ethical egoism is often linked to psychological egoism. However, there is an acute difference among the two. Ethical egoism is, according to James Rachels in The Elements of Moral Philosophy, is the idea that each person ought to pursue his or her own self-interest exclusively, whereas psychological egoism is a theory of human nature concerned with how people actually behave, and it has theorized that humans do behave in their own self-interest. Therefore, one is what should happen, and the other is what has been observed to happen. Ethical egoism, the idea that the individual wraps themselves in luxuries, comfort, and the pursuit of their own desires, they are clouded from seeing the real-world problems that surround them, is controversial in all its aspects. How does an individual, a knower, manage to uphold morality if morality, according to James Rachels, requires one to balance his own self-interest with the interest of others? However, 5,000 years of documented human history seem to indicate that the balance between individual and others' interests is evidently tipped in favor of our selfish desires. Do our moral duties lie solely to serve the individual? How then does the society regulate the vices of human behavior if there is no presence of moral duties that exceed the individual? How then does the whole of society regulate the vices of human behavior if there is no presence of moral duties that exceed the individual? Ethical egoism claims that each person has but one ultimate aim, their own welfare. However, it does indeed allow for aiming at things other than one's welfare, such as helping others, where these things are a means for one's self-desires. However, it condemns altruistic behavior, or motivation by thoughts of duty alone. The real-world implication in many ways are diminishing. For example, a soldier is trained to serve the higher duty of their country and its safety. However, according to the ethical egoist theory, that soldier does so only for personal exploitment and gain. Is the principle of self-interest really the leading principle of conduct? Personally, my ideologies lean to a more common-sense view, as described by James Rachels. Ethical egoism is indeed valuable, in that it highlights that one's self-interest are a guiding factor for one's moral behavior. However, its practical value does not outweigh or discredit another guiding factor for human and moral behavior, the ethics of altruism. The ethics of altruism is the theory that one's own interests have no value, and that one must be ready to sacrifice oneself totally, according to James Rachels. This view is as equally radical and as equally blinding as that of ethical egoism. I am not in accord with the extent to which self-desires are elevated above those of others, as done by the ethical egoist theory. The arguments to support ethical egoism often assume that there are only two moral behavior alternatives: living by the ethics of altruism or by ethical egoism. However, morality is not as black and white as ethical egoists make it out to be. On the contrary, I believe that although not a precise balance, there exists a blend between one's own self-interest and those of others. This blend might be dictated primarily by one or the other, depending on the situation. A real-world example, which I think is quite recent in the minds of all, due to the extent of tragedy caused by this event, is the Parkland High School shooting on the 14th of February, in which 17 people were killed by one man alone, with a vendetta. Among these were 3 adults, who died shielding and protecting students from a gunman, all of which are heroes without a doubt. Can ethical egoists really diminish their actions to the simple pursuit of their selfish desires? At the same time, one individual has been targeted by the media for having an opposite reaction. The security guard on campus, the only other armed individual, did not go into the building, but rather retreated to safety. Whether this reaction was prompted by human nature's fight-or-flight response, can ethical egoists really celebrate his inaction against the vow he had taken to protect the students of that school? The responsibility to oneself doesn't outweigh the greater good. In a society that motivates self-interest-based behavior through competitions, punishments, and rewards, selfishness is often sponsored. Given this, I am in accord with Jason Butler's rebuttal of the ethical egoist theory, in which he describes that
An individual must desire things other than their own welfare in order to get welfare at all. As explained by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Psychology, say I derive welfare from helping others. Unless I desired for its own sake that others do well, I would not derive welfare from helping them. Welfare results from my action, but cannot be the only aim for my action. Therefore, I think this is really important to consider that others do play a major role in what constitutes a person's moral code and a moral behavior, not necessarily, as the ethical egoist theory says, that it is exclusive to one's personal gain and one's personal interest. I think it is something much more selfless than that. And it combines that selfish element of the individual and the group that surrounds that individual. Thank you.